All right, so today we're looking at some really interesting excerpts about a potential kind of like a sea change in the global financial system.
Yeah.
Really kind of questioning, like, is the U.S. dollar's dominance coming to an end?
Yeah.
Could we see the Chinese yuan replacing it
Interesting.
at the top?
Yeah.
So let's dive into this a little bit.
Yeah, I think what's really caught everyone's attention is this idea of a new world currency order emerging.
Right.
And the excerpts you've shared point to some pretty compelling evidence, like the yuan surpassing the dollar in global payments.
Really?
2.5%.
2.5%?
Yeah.
Wow, that's significant.
It's not insignificant.
What's driving this? Is it just China's like economic engine outpacing everyone else, or is there more to it?
I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. China's been very strategic in promoting the yuan's use internationally.
Okay.
For example, they've been setting up these bilateral currency swaps with other countries, making it easier to trade directly in yuan.
Makes sense.
And then you've got things like China's Belt and Road Initiative, which further promotes the yuan's use in these big infrastructure projects across continents.
Wow.
So these are long-term plays.
Yeah, they're playing the long game, it seems like. And they're getting some major players on board, too. The recent expansion of BRICS, bringing in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran. That's a big deal. Huge. To bring those countries into the fold.
I mean, the bloc was already a significant economic force.
Right.
Adding these countries, particularly a petrostate like Saudi Arabia, adds a whole new dimension to this.
You know, let's break down the petrodollar thing for a second, because I think it's easy for people to not fully grasp that.
It's complex.
How does pricing oil in dollars actually benefit the U.S.?
So since the 1970s, oil, which is obviously like the lifeblood of the global economy, has been traded primarily in U.S. dollars. And this creates this constant demand for dollars because countries need them to buy oil. So this demand props up the dollar's value, allows the U.S. to borrow money at lower rates. It's a powerful system that's really underpinned U.S. economic dominance.
So when we talk about the petrodollar's potential demise, we're not just talking about oil. We're talking about a fundamental shift in global power dynamics.
And this is where Saudi Arabia joining BRICS gets really interesting.
Right, because it signals a potential willingness to move away from the petrodollar system. And even perhaps pricing oil in yuan.
Right.
Imagine the ripple effects of that. I mean, that would be massive.
Yeah.
And it's not like this is just some far-off possibility.
Right.
You know, one of the excerpts you shared mentioned that even U.S. allies, like India, are increasingly using the yuan for oil trades.
Interesting.
And they reportedly saved billions.
Wow.
By choosing the yuan over the dollar in these recent deals.
Wow. That's a powerful incentive.
Right.
And it illustrates how economic realities sometimes trump traditional alliances.
Yeah.
Countries are pragmatic.
Right.
They gravitate towards what benefits them financially.
Absolutely. And speaking of pragmatism, I love this whole made in America but paid in yuan concept.
It's interesting.
What's the story there?
Well, it's kind of a paradox. The U.S. imposing sanctions on Russia actually kind of backfired in a way. It pushed Russia and its allies to find alternatives to the dollar.
Right.
And this accelerated the yuan's adoption. Right. Even for goods that we traditionally associate with the U.S., it really highlights the unintended consequences of economic warfare.
It really makes you think, like, are these attempts to maintain the dollar's dominance actually hastening its decline?
It's a great question. And it's not just about sanctions either. It's the rise of these alternative financial systems that are further challenging the existing order.
Right, like BRICS Pay and China's CIPS.
Exactly.
Can you explain how those work and why they're significant? I'll be honest, when I first heard about these alternative systems, I was kind of like, okay, but can they really compete with something like SWIFT, you know? Right. But then I was reading about some real-world examples.
Yeah, what'd you find?
Russia and Iran.
Right.
Over 60% of their trade now bypasses SWIFT entirely.
Wow.
They've linked their national payment systems.
Interesting.
And basically created their own financial ecosystem.
Yeah.
So it seems like they're showing that these viable alternatives do exist.
Yeah. And that's a worrying precedent for those who are, you know, invested in maintaining that dollar dominance.
Right.
If more countries start to see these systems as not just viable, but preferable.
Right.
It really could undermine that existing financial order.
And that would in turn make this whole idea of a new world currency order
less
of like a hypothetical and more of a near future reality.
Right. Yeah, it adds to the momentum for sure. And it's interesting, historical parallels can be really valuable when we're analyzing these kinds of shifts.
Yep.
And there are some intriguing parallels between this situation and the decline of the Roman Empire.
Interesting. Okay, give me the history lesson. How does ancient Rome tie into all of this?
So for centuries, the Roman denarius, the silver coin,
Yeah.
was the bedrock of their economic system. It was reliable, it was trusted, kind of like the dollar today.
Okay.
But as the empire expanded, they faced financial strains. And so they started reducing the silver content in the denarius, debasing their currency to create more coin.
So they just tried to spend their way out of trouble
Yeah.
by basically watering down their currency.
Essentially, yeah, it's a tactic as old as time. And it ultimately backfired. The denarius lost its value, led to rampant inflation. Imagine trying to buy a loaf of bread with a wheelbarrow full of worthless coins.
Wow.
Like, that's what Roman citizens were dealing with.
Yeah.
It eroded trust-fueled instability, and it really contributed to the empire's eventual decline.
That's a scary thought, and that's why this historical parallel is really resonating. Because the U.S. national debt has just skyrocketed recently, exceeding $35 trillion. It's more than doubled in just the past 15 years. And we're seeing these massive injections of money into the economy.
Yeah, it's a complex situation, and a lot of economists are drawing these parallels between the Romans' actions and the potential consequences of excessive money creation. And unsustainable debt, it's not a perfect one-to-one comparison, but that underlying principle of debasing a currency, whether it's through literal debasement or excessive money printing, holds a cautionary tale.
Yeah, it definitely makes you question the long-term stability of the dollar, especially as you see countries like China strategically reducing their holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds.
Huge signal.
Yeah.
Because for a long time, U.S. Treasury securities were seen as this safe haven asset, this rock-solid investment. Central banks worldwide held them as like a core part of their reserves.
Right.
But as the U.S. debt has ballooned and those anxieties about the dollar's long-term strength have surfaced, countries like China are diversifying. They're shifting away from those dollar-denominated assets.
It's like they're hedging their bets.
Yeah.
Like we need a backup plan if this whole dollar-centric system starts to wobble.
Exactly. And it's not just China. We're seeing this broader trend of central banks globally decreasing those dollar reserves.
Really?
Yeah, it's gradual, but it speaks volumes about those evolving dynamics.
Of global finance.
Yeah.
So it seems like we're witnessing a potential power shift in real time.
Yeah.
But it's not all doom and gloom, right? I mean, aren't there potential upsides for the U.S. in a less dollar-dominant world?
Absolutely. I think it's important to remember with any economic shift, there are winners and losers.
Right.
One potential advantage of a weaker dollar is that it could make U.S. exports more competitive. American goods would become cheaper for other countries to buy, which could potentially boost U.S. manufacturing.
So it's like anything else.
Yeah.
You know, when the value of something goes down, demand for it can increase. So a less mighty dollar could actually be a good thing.
Yeah.
For American industries.
Potentially. A weaker dollar could also reduce the U.S. trade deficit because imports become more expensive.
Right.
So this could theoretically help rebalance global trade flows.
So it's not as simple as dollar down, bad dollar up, good. There's a lot of layers to this.
It's so nuanced.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so crucial to stay informed.
Right.
And to approach these changes with that balanced perspective.
So let's bring this back to the individual listener for a second.
Yeah.
If we are moving towards this multipolar currency system, as many experts suggest, what does this mean for everyday people? Like, what should we be doing?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And I think it's one that more and more people are asking themselves.
So if the global financial landscape is kind of being rewritten as we speak, where does that leave, like, the average person? What's the smart move in a world where, you know, relying solely on the dollar? It seems a little less certain.
Well, I think it goes back to that age-old principle of diversification.
Right.
It's like you wouldn't put all your eggs in one basket, you know, in terms of investments.
Yeah.
Spreading your financial risk across different currencies could be a smart strategy.
So instead of just thinking in terms of dollars and cents, we need to kind of broaden our horizons a little bit. Are there any particular currencies that stand out, or is it more about the overall principle?
It's a little bit of both, I think. Some experts are suggesting looking at currencies that are backed by tangible assets, or those of countries that are experiencing substantial economic growth.
Okay.
But I think the bigger takeaway is that this idea of a single safe haven currency might be fading.
And this is where things get really interesting, because it's not just about individual currencies anymore. It's about these whole new systems emerging. Like the excerpts you sent mentioned BRICS establishing its own development bank, the new development bank.
Right.
What's the significance of that?
I think it signals a direct challenge to the existing order.
Okay.
For decades, the World Bank and the IMF, institutions that have largely been dominated by Western nations, have been the primary sources of financing and development for a lot of countries.
Right.
BRICS is now offering this alternative, often with fewer conditions attached to the loans and investments.
So it's not just about shifting currencies. It's about providing a totally different avenue for these countries to achieve economic growth and development.
Exactly. And that has the power to really reshape global alliances and relationships. Because if countries have more options, more leverage, it changes the whole dynamic.
Yeah, it's like the playing field is changing.
For sure.
So it's a lot to process. For someone who's listening, who's trying to kind of keep up with all of this, what are some key developments to watch out for in the coming months and years?
I would say keep an eye on further expansion of that BRICS bloc. The more countries that join, the greater its influence, and the more pressure it puts on that existing order.
So who's next to join the club? Any predictions?
It's hard to say for sure, but nations like Indonesia, Turkey, and a few South American countries have expressed some interest.
Okay.
And their decisions could have major regional implications.
Okay, so BRICS expansion is one to watch.
What else? I'd say track how central banks globally are managing those currency reserves. Are they continuing to reduce their dollar holdings? Are they increasing their gold reserves?
Oh.
These are really key indicators of where they see stability and value long term.
Yeah, it's like reading between the lines of global finance. Look at who's diversifying, who's stockpiling, who's making moves that suggest a little bit of a shift in confidence.
Exactly. And maybe the most important piece of advice I could give is don't panic.
Right.
Change can be unsettling, but it also creates opportunity by staying informed, thinking critically, and being adaptable. You can navigate these shifts effectively, and you might even be able to benefit from this emerging world order.
Yeah, I love that. Don't panic, be prepared. That's a good mantra for just about anything these days. Well, that's our deep dive into the future of money, the rise of alternative currencies, and the potential for a monumental shift in the global financial order.
It's complex, it's evolving. But the key is to stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. The more you understand about these global shifts, the better equipped you'll be to navigate them.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought-provoking question. If the world's financial systems are being rewritten right before our eyes, what role do you want to play in shaping this new reality? Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep